In November 2007, Kate Prout, a teacher from Gloucestershire, vanished without a trace. Police suspected she'd been murdered.
The police were building a case around the circumstances in which Kate had gone missing. They worked through a number of hypotheses. Those hypotheses led them eventually to the fact that it could only have been Adrian that killed Kate.
When Kate's husband, Adrian Prout, was convicted of her murder, his new fiancée, Debbie, had just given birth to their daughter.
It was sad, because obviously I had my daughter. I was thinking, her dad's in prison, he's innocent. This is our life, this can't be happening. We're normal people. But we were normal people.
I think all the village where he lived thought he was innocent. So there was a big groundswell of the poor chap's in prison. He's such a nice, quietly spoken, unassuming person. You can't imagine him doing that.
After years of claiming that he'd been framed, in November 2011, Adrian finally admitted the truth.
From his prison cell, handcuffed to a policeman, the convicted killer and now confessed murderer, Adrian Prout, returns to the farm where he committed his crime.
It was real. A man that you love has actually dug a hole in the ground and buried his wife. And this so-say man is meant to be the love of your life. But no one wants a man like that in their lives, do they?
In 2007, Adrian Prout was running a 276-acre farm in the village of Redmarley in Gloucestershire.
He lived at the farm with Kate. I think they'd lived there for a couple of years, but I've never seen Adrian around anywhere.
One evening in the local pub, Adrian and Debbie's paths crossed.
Adrian walked in with some friends that I already knew. I think they'd been on a shoot. It was one of the shoot days, and they came down to have a drink. I've never seen him before. Just started chatting to him. I was with my friend. Seemed a really pleasant, nice person.
Adrian ran a pipe-laying business as well as a busy farm and successful pheasant shoot.
He was a businessman in the village that everyone liked. And he used to help people, you know, when it snowed, you know, to get the tractor and right down the lanes and clear all the snow for everyone to drive. So it's all little things like that that people knew about him.
When your friends introduce you to someone, you immediately feel safe because you trust their opinion of this person, and he is somebody who's very ensconced in village life and people know who he is. So that gives you another layer of safety.
He said, "Do you know who I am?" And then we said no. And then we realised, then he said about his wife going missing.
Adrian's explanation was that she'd walked out on him before and had done it this time for real.
Because he was with some people that we knew, and they were saying it was just village gossip and he hasn't said anything, she's just gone off, and that's how it was left. I did go home and have a look at it, but there was nothing, no one thing to say that he'd done anything.
He told her story, that his wife had gone missing, that police thought he'd killed her. He hadn't. She believed him, and that set in motion the chain of events.
I didn't know when I first met him that he'd been interviewed or anything. I didn't know anything like that whatsoever. It was only as we started talking. But then he explained that their relationship was quite volatile. They were getting divorced. She had gone off before. When I met him in the May, he was on bail.
Prout alleged he couldn't quite understand why he'd been left in this position without a spouse. He was well respected in the community, well liked, etc., etc. And at first, people's hearts went out to him. He'd been abandoned.
I sort of quite liked him, and he put his telephone number through my door, and then I phoned him and we arranged to go out on a bank holiday Monday. There was a connection there. I think you sense that with, there was definitely a connection there.
While Debbie and Adrian grew close, investigators were still examining every detail surrounding Kate's disappearance.
The police have had some months to be able to explore all of the way in which Kate lived her life, coupled with the things that Adrian has said to them up till now, and put to him that the two just don't correlate, they don't match up, and things are not right. And because we don't think they're right, we think they point to the fact that you are likely to have killed your wife.
So-called no-body murders present a huge challenge for the police.
When you have a body, it tells you so much. It'll tell you how they've died, potentially. It'll tell you where they've died, how long ago they may well have died. Without a body, you're relying on circumstantial evidence. You are building a picture about how someone lived their life and how they died purely by circumstance and without a great deal of the clear facts that come with the discovery and examination of a body.
Despite Adrian being the only viable suspect, in January 2009, he was released from bail.
It was just the end of the shooting season, and Adrian had a phone call from the police saying that he'd been released without charge. So obviously we were like over the moon, so basically he wasn't being charged for Kate's murder or the disappearance of Kate or whatever anybody wants to say.
Adrian is not a suspect any longer. The police formally and publicly declare that. And that may well have been a move by the police, tactically, just to allow people to relax a little bit. When they do that, they have conversations with friends and family, and they do things that they may not have done if they were on police bail.
On that moment, that weekend, we decided to move in together, and the children. So we all moved up to the farm. Life was happy. I thought I've got my perfect family.
Debbie and her children lived with Adrian at the farm he'd bought with his wife, Kate.
His daughter was involved in our lives as well. His parents used to come out, my parents used to come out. We'd do dinners, we'd do barbecues, we'd socialise with everybody, everybody else. So yeah, just a normal life. Wasn't anything different to anybody else.
The bubble of domestic bliss didn't last long.
On the 10th of March, Adrian had gone out early, left the house early to go to work to pick up some machinery. Me and my older two children were still in bed, so it was quite early in the morning. All we heard was like doors opening and banging and voices. We heard voices, and I got up, my son got up, and all these police were in the house. They're asking where Adrian is, and I think it wasn't what they said. It was the scene to come into, and there was like 6-7 police officers in the kitchen.
There's clearly been something significant that has changed the dynamic of that investigation, and the police have clearly reached a decision that they've got what they need in terms of background and context, but probably now motive. The third and final thing that's important, really.
My children, they were scared. Obviously they were scared. We were all scared. We didn't know what was going on. They asked me to phone Adrian to come back. They wouldn't tell me why. And when Adrian came back, 20 minutes later, he walked in the house and they arrested him in front of us. He laughed. To me, it wasn't laugh thinking, oh, it was laugh thinking, really, what are you doing this for? We're going back down this route again. we were all crying, and they said, we're arresting you for the murder of Kate Prout. And they handcuffed him and took him away in a car. And we were just there, left thinking, have they found her? Have they found something? Because as all as we knew that we were living our normal life, Kate was disappeared. She hasn't been found, a body hasn't been, not as far as we know. So that was the shock thing about it all.
Debbie was advised that Adrian would likely remain in custody until his trial. But just a month later, he was released on bail and back home with the family.
Well, they're not going to let anyone out of prison who's murdered somebody. So he can't have done it. He can't have done it.
When Kate Prout had disappeared in 2007, her husband Adrian's version of events seemed believable.
I mean, she'd gone before. She'd gone, so he said. She'd gone off before after an argument they had. She ended up staying with her family. And so Adrian said that he'd phoned up to see where she was, and they denied that she was there. Whether or not that was true, I'm not 100% sure, obviously. So we just thought that the family were hiding her.
Kate was last heard from when she called her bank at 3:29 on the afternoon of the 5th of November, 2007.
How can I help you today? I need to obtain one of my old bank statements going back to 1999.
Adrian didn't call the police until 5 days later.
And you weren't, even though weeks gone by, you had no concern about her well-being, and you...
Well, I did, but I thought if things weren't good, someone would have rang me, or, you know, I assumed she was okay.
There would be concern right from the outset when Adrian made that call to report his wife, simply because it's not normal to wait for 5 days to report your wife missing. So already your senses are tingling, you're a little bit concerned.
I thought she was with her sister, and he said, no, we've tried your sister. And I said, well, have you tried so-and-so? And everyone I mentioned, he tried. So we sort of said, we better get the police involved.
And whose decision was that to get the police involved?
Mine.
The decision was clearly made that Adrian's account wasn't quite standing scrutiny, or there was more to it, which caused the grounds to suspect that she may well have been murdered, and that he was likely to be the suspect.
2 weeks after Kate was reported missing, Adrian Prout was first arrested on suspicion of her murder.
There clearly wasn't the evidence to charge him, and probably the police knew that. They probably knew that it was going to be a long, challenging and difficult process to get the evidence. No body, someone that was denying it, and very little evidence, and what did exist was circumstantial.
Everybody believed Prout's story that he'd been dumped, that he was innocent, that he had no involvement in Kate's death, and that Kate had simply disappeared.
There was no reason not to believe him. Yeah, everyone felt sorry for him. The police didn't have any evidence, so we just didn't have a clue, but we believed that he was innocent.
16 months after she disappeared, despite no body being found, police finally had enough evidence to charge Adrian with Kate's murder. He was bailed until the trial.
Once we got him out on bail, our life returned back to normal. We're thinking it's a conspiracy, that the family were hiding her. They knew where she was. They were just trying to get the money off Adrian. That's all what kept going through my mind, and Adrian agreed with it all.
You can see how we can create a story in our head that fits the narrative that creates the fantasy that we want, that I've got my perfect family, I've moved in with this guy, it's all working really well. I believe him, and all those naysayers and all those people coming in with their own stories about something terrible has happened, it's about something else. It's about their greed. And you can see from Debbie's point of view, where would she be looking for the signals or the symbols or the signs that he's guilty? So far, everything that she's checking off her list, he seems like a safe pair of hands.
And then a few weeks later, we got engaged. By the time I booked the party, I realised that I was pregnant, and we were really happy about it. But I mean, we'd been together sort of, a year and a half or something by then. Not very long, but and then we had a party and told everybody we were going to have a baby, and everybody were really pleased. People were beginning to think, I didn't think this, but this is what I heard afterwards. Why, if he's getting engaged, he's already married? And does he know that she's not coming back?
We've got this lovely home, we've got our children. I love this guy, everything is wonderful. Let's get married. Completely forgetting that he's already married and his wife is still missing at this point.
Behind the scenes, the police were gathering evidence that Kate Prout wasn't missing, but that Adrian had murdered her.
How would Kate know what her appointments are?
She might have a diary. Well, she has got a diary.
No, she's got a diary. So, do you know whether she uses that diary for appointments?
Well, yeah, I would have said so.
Unbeknownst to Adrian, his wife Kate had used her diary to document more than just appointments.
Kate's diary detailed how she was feeling, the concerns that she had for her own safety, and issues financially that she needed to explore with Adrian. And that's really some of the key points that exist around motive. The request for more money within the divorce settlement was clearly a burning issue for Adrian at that time. Something that he probably wasn't going to accept within the context of having to sell the farm as a result.
The trial was going to start on January the 11th, which was 2010. Our daughter was due on the same day, so I went into hospital a week early to have my daughter. I stayed in hospital for two nights. He stayed in there with us, and we had her, and it was lovely. I mean, we had a week at home together before the court case started. It was nice. People, people come over, don't they, bring gifts and see the baby, and Adrian was proud that we had our little daughter together. And then the trial began. He wanted to prove that he was innocent, and he said that the only way he can do it was by going to court.
Life for the couple settled into a new version of normality.
He'd leave early in the morning to go to the court, and then come home. Even though we had a new baby, I'd still dinner was ready for when he got home, and normal life.
What's hanging over this family is a murder trial. And I wonder whether Adrian was quite the performer, and what he showed her and performed in front of her was normality. That I'm just going through the motions. I know I haven't done anything wrong. This, now I've come home, this is normal family time, and we'll just behave as if, we're just regular people. And I think this is something that Debbie very strongly hangs on to. We're just a normal family.
I didn't go to court for the first 3 weeks. Adrian went with my family and his family. Obviously, our baby was 1 week old when the court case started. And then on the 4th week, when the jury went into to consider the verdict, he asked me to go up every day in the last week. So when the jury came out with a verdict, he presumed he'd be found not guilty, and he wanted us to walk out the court together. and to live the rest of our lives. The champagne was put in the fridge ready for that night to come home, for everyone to come back, for us all to celebrate that basically this was over and now we could all start living our lives and look to the future. That's what we were all imagining was going to happen.
On the 5th of February 2010, the jury reached a verdict.
The whispers were going around that 9 people were saying one thing and 2 people were saying another thing. So Adrian automatically thought that 9 people thought he was innocent and turned around and said, "I can't believe 2 people think I've done it." So the jury, so we all go back into the court and then the verdict was guilty.
Adrian was convicted with circumstantial evidence. That's a fact, that those circumstances surrounding Kate's disappearance and the fact that she could no longer be alive, that was the only possible conclusion that the court had to draw. And secondly, that Adrian was the only person that could be responsible.
We were crying because we were like, he was being taken away from us. But you look across and the Wakefields are crying because they still didn't have their sister. But the sad thing is, we probably wouldn't have thought of that either. Maybe a bit later on, but you wouldn't have thought that. We just wanted him to come home. It was horrendous. It was a nightmare that you thought would never happen. In our minds was, Kate had gone, she had disappeared wherever she was, but to us there was no body, there was no evidence, there's nothing to prove that Adrian had killed her or done anything untoward to Kate. As far as we were concerned, there was no proof whatsoever.
As Adrian awaited sentencing for Kate's murder, Debbie believed that a miscarriage of justice had ripped Adrian from her and their newborn baby's lives.
The verdict changed our lives. You know, we were meant to be going home together that night. We'd been going home together he'd been coming home from court for the last 4 weeks. But today he's not. He's going straight to prison. And then, you know, we walked out the court and all the press were there and someone shouted out, "What sort of life is this going to give your baby daughter?" And that hit home then, thinking, yeah, it's hard. Next morning, I went down to the shop, the local post office, and I bought every paper what had it in. I bought every single one. And I remember even the chap in the post office who I knew, he went, "I'm so sorry," because he believed he was innocent as well. And we read all the papers, and we were saying, have we missed something? It kept going over in our minds, has he done it? Has he not done it? And then I felt guilty for thinking that. And then, so the visit, we would have had a visit sometime that week, I don't know what day it was, or anything else. And when we got there, I asked him if he had done it. And he said no, and I asked him to swear on our daughter's life. And he did. So then I had thoughts, I was upset all the way home because I was feeling guilty that I thought he had done it. So my thoughts were thinking, that's really bad of me to think that he has done it. You know, after all this time, and now I think he has, and now he's just said he hasn't.
It doesn't matter what he has to say for it. At the end of the day, it's the evidence and the information that is important. That's what the court heard. That's what they convicted him on.
Adrian was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 18 years.
When marriages break up and when husbands or wives disappear Fleet Street isn't really interested. It makes a paragraph or two. But when Adrian Prout was convicted of murdering his wife Kate, albeit without a body, Fleet Street suddenly took a huge interest in Debbie Garlick.
That's when our fight began. Our fight began we made websites, we did petitions for miscarriage of justice for Adrian. We sat through unused evidence day after day, night after night, trying to get an appeal for him to get out.
He was still saying, I didn't do it. She's gone off her own. I don't know where she is. I'm not responsible. That's a story he maintained.
This is the person you trust and have put your emotional investment in, and you've seen them up close and personal, and you can't find evidence for yourself of their guilt. For Debbie, the concrete evidence of his innocence is coming from him. The bad guys out there in the world are the ones who's found him guilty.
There was an ex-boyfriend of Kate's around that we thought he was involved in concealing it. She wanted half the farm, which is what she was entitled to. So we thought that Kate's family were trying to get the money. It was probably naive, really, but in that moment of time, it wasn't for us, if you get what I mean.
I knew straight away, after the first week, that there was something drastically wrong, why Kate wasn't there. And there was no reason for Kate to go away and leave that farm.
Debbie was very determined, was a very determined lady, determined to right a wrong. She had marshalled this sort of army of friends and relatives, of both families and friends, etc., to try and find Kate.
Tom Hendry became Debbie's media advisor.
I realised there was potential for a really great story.
There's a £10,000 reward offered to anybody who had any information that would release Adrian from prison. So that went out. We had quite a few people say that they thought they saw her around. There was one thing that someone thought there was a spotting in Ireland. Kate was a teacher, and there was an advert in the post office saying a tutor. This lady was a tutor. Her name was Kate. She was teaching English and maths, and we were like, this is her, we've got her.
We went over to Ireland, the news agency sent a photographer. I didn't go personally. Debbie was joking, as to if Kate had turned up, there would have been a film made, and who would have played her?
Everybody was at the house that day waiting for this phone call, all my family, all Adrian's family, because we thought we'd found her, and it wasn't her. And then there was another sighting in Scarborough. We 100% thought she was alive.
It had gone on for so long, you had to take your hat off and respect the efforts Debbie had gone to. And I thought, if this guy Prout took a lie detector test, that would prove, maybe, once and for all, if he was telling the truth or not.
We knew that a lie detector test doesn't stand in British courts. We know that. But we thought if he passed it, then obviously it's a good shout. It'd go, put it to the papers. Adrian Prout has passed the lie detector test. It's got to prove something. It has to prove something.
They needed to get Adrian to agree.
I didn't have any suspicions about him. He was very calm, very controlled, and therefore, I didn't smell any kind of rat at all.
And we suggested a lie detector test to Adrian, and he agreed with no hesitation. No hesitation, he said he would do it.
You always assume you can spot the murderer. In truth, if I took a view and I looked at a chap and said, there's the murderer, it wouldn't be the picture of Adrian Prout. He'd look like a nice, gentle, best mate to go to the pub with and a game of pool with type of chap.
few days before the lie detector, Adrian was phoning saying that he was worried he was going to be set up, and it'd be, it'd be rigged so that he'd fail it. And all that. I said, "Oh, don't be silly. Don't be silly. You've got to do this. You've got to do this. There's a good chance to, get this appeal."
He has to sign a consent form to allow me to continue with the test. He read it, and it was obviously hesitating. I went back into the room after about 5 minutes and I said, "Come on, Adrian, are we going to do this test or not?" He said, "Yeah, okay. I'll do it for Debbie's sake." And I said, "Well, do it for Debbie's sake? Do it for your own sake. You're the accused murderer. Do it for your own sake." No, I've got to do it for Debbie's sake. For Debbie's sake.
My main focus then was getting this lie detector, passing it, put it into the papers, and we had a petition going, and people had signed it. I had loads of names for this petition, and he was sort of fretting about it, and I just thought, I think anybody would be probably nervous doing a lie detector test, whether you were telling the truth. I think I probably would be.
So the questions are relatively straightforward. This is like asking a child with chocolate round his mouth, "Have you eaten that chocolate?" No. You know full well they have. So the questions were quite simple. Did you kill your wife, Kate Prout? Did you pay for someone else to kill your wife, Kate Prout? And do you know where Kate is now? He said no to all those 3 questions. And at the end of the chart, I scored them manually. I let the computer score them as well. I think my eyes must have bulged because I was looking at a murderer now. And I knew he was a murderer. And he knew that I knew he was a murderer. And there was that realisation moment of the cat in the headlight moment when I said to him, "You're a murderer, Adrian."
The phone rings, and I was expecting a phone because I didn't know it would be from the chap from the polygraph, and it was Adrian. And he said, "I failed. They rigged it. It wasn't properly done." I didn't know what to say. I really didn't know what to say. I don't even know what went through my mind. I didn't even know if I believed it was rigged. It was like a shock, thinking, wow, what are we going to do now? So I put the phone down to him, and the polygraph man phoned.
I literally said, "Debbie, I'm sorry, I've got some bad news for you. Adrian has done it." And her reaction was, "Are you sure?" I said, "Yeah, I am. Yeah, he did it."
When you have that thing that your tummy just drops and you think, "Oh my God, he has done it." And then all the things flash through your mind thinking, her family. And that's all I kept thinking about was her family. All this stuff I'd done on the TV, thinking that on the news, Adrian Prout's innocent. What the hell did they think?
When there is a killer in the family, those left behind are the victims. They had nothing to do with it, but yet they sometimes feel they carry the stain of that person's actions. And they don't. They are also victims. They've also gone through a lot of loss, and they have to grieve that loss. And some of that loss is about losing the person they thought they had.
We didn't even tell anyone. I mean, it was something that we wanted to shout from the rooftops originally, but now all the plans they've gone. That was my last hope, to prove to everybody else, look, this man that I've been trying to prove that he's innocent, he is innocent, he's just passed a lie detector test. It stands in America, and it was a really big thing for me, but he failed.
Debbie had pinned all of her hopes on the outcome of Adrian's lie detector test.
In my mind, I still kept thinking that he still wasn't a murderer, but unfortunately he had failed. So it did change thinking, if he'd have passed it, I'd have believed it, so why would I not believe it because he failed? So that's when things began to change.
She was naturally devastated and heartbroken. I mean, she'd been the victim of a cruel con man who we now knew was a killer.
I don't think I could see Adrian for a bit, because I think I had one visit up with him and we sort of talked about the polygraph, but not a major thing. I think our conversation, there was no conversation. I didn't know what to say. But he was trying to prove his innocence still, but my head was messed.
By November 2011, 3 months after the polygraph, Debbie had decided what she was going to do.
I knew I was going to ask him that day. It was in my mind, I'm going to find out the truth. And in fairness, I did say that I would stand by him if he told me the truth. But I didn't expect the truth of what he said. I know that sounds really sort of... so I said, whatever happens, you need to tell me. You failed the lie detector test. We want to know, have you killed Kate? Because if you have, you need to give her a proper funeral. That's my exact words to him. And he went, yeah, I have. And then he started telling us, then he told us where she was buried. I mean, I just wanted to get out of there. I just wanted to go. He didn't want me to go to the police for a bit. He wanted to get his head round it and organise a solicitor. But as soon as I left that night, I went straight home, and then I phoned the police when I got home.
She was brave enough to say, you know what, hands up, he is guilty, he has failed that test, and it's time for me to recognise that. That takes quite a lot of courage.
This morning, I'm going to read you a prepared statement in relation to why we are here. The statement goes, yesterday morning, we received some new and significant information in relation to the murder of Kate Prout. I don't think the police were ever expecting for Adrian to make any admissions, and we never thought that we'd ever get to a stage where we could find Kate. So we asked Adrian if he'd be willing to show us where Kate's body was, and he agreed to do that.
From his prison cell, handcuffed to a policeman, the convicted killer and now confessed murderer, Adrian Prout, returns to the farm where he committed his crime.
They picked him up from the prison and he had to go to the farm and pinpoint where he buried her.
We've got something that's probably about the size of a football field to work with. So we're using the information that Adrian is telling us. We're working with ground penetrating radar and other tactical options to help explore the provenance of that and to give us the best chance and where to start initially. And it was a pressured situation. It was a tough gig. And the reason it was tough is because there is huge expectation from the family, from the public, from senior police officers that you need to get this done and moved on. And it wasn't happening anytime soon. And eventually, after nearly 4 days, I get a phone call from my scenes of crime manager on that shift to say that, we found her, we know it's her, and she's still got the wedding ring on. At 1 o'clock this afternoon, we have found human remains close to the location Adrian Prout identified as the place he buried his wife. I do hope that this will be the final chapter of these harrowing events for Kate's family.
I cried, I sobbed, thinking, for one, for the Wakefields after everything they've been through, this is a long time coming for them, and now she's been found, and for their state of mind must have been, and for ours it was like, this man who we had in our lives, he's actually did this, he's actually buried a body. Not only has he killed her, he's buried her and he's hid it from his family, from her family, from everybody, and everything we did to try to get him out of prison.
Beneath this dark woodland canopy, there is now little trace of what was a crime scene.
Kate would never have been found. The body would never have been found if it wasn't pinpointed. I mean, because she was in the pheasant pen, she never would have been found. Never.
I remember very clearly thinking, when we found Kate, thank goodness. Thank goodness, and thank goodness for the family, because everybody knew that she'd been murdered. The evidence supported that, really, circumstantial as it was. But just to be able to say, yes, and she's coming home.
Despite it not being the ending Debbie had hoped for, Kate was found as a direct result of Debbie's determination to uncover the truth.
I feel really, really guilty. I thought she was out there. You know, they must have known in their heart that she was gone, she was dead. And they must have known, they knew that Adrian had done it. And they were trying to prove he was guilty, and we were trying to prove he's innocent. Two families on two different sides. And there's a lot between being guilty and innocent, isn't there? It just proves, doesn't it, what sort of man, unfortunately, he is, because he obviously had no remorse of anything what he'd done to Kate. He just moved on with his life in the way that he wanted to.
Everybody was fooled by him. I suppose, well, the lie detector test proved that I was among them. But he was a very convincing liar.
Debbie and Adrian's daughter was just a month old when her father was sentenced. Her only memories of him are in prison.
We have had visits with him. I've said that. I mean, at the end of the day, he is her dad. But no, she knew that he'd killed somebody, and she knew obviously he was in prison, but she didn't know all the details. So for her to find out that, it was very upsetting for her. If he hadn't been found guilty and went to prison, he'd probably still be there now. Or was wondering where she was, or who she was with. Obviously, we'd have thought she was still alive. We would have just had a normal life. But she was buried on the land that we lived in. Meeting Adrian, and it really was probably 1 in a million. You can't judge everybody by what he'd done, even though sometimes it's hard not to. But we were just a normal family.
In 2004, police officer Drew Peterson's wife Kathy died in what he claimed was a tragic accident.
The crime scene photos showed Kathleen curled up in a relatively small bathtub. It almost looked as if she had been jammed into the tub.
The moment that I looked at the photograph of her in the bathtub, I said, this is a murder. This is not an accident.
Then his next wife vanished.
The public was first introduced to Drew Peterson in October of 2007 when his fourth wife, Stacy Peterson, was reported missing.
His family were forced to accept that Drew Peterson wasn't just a police officer. He was a killer.
I do blame my dad for a lot of things. Obviously, what he did to our family, it's unforgivable. He's still my dad. I still love him. I still want the best for him. But, acknowledge what you've done to us.
It was hard. It has torn our family apart, is what it's done. There are no more Christmases. There are no more great family gatherings. And this was a family that thrived on being together. and he destroyed it all.
In 2012, at Will County Courthouse, former police officer Drew Peterson was found guilty of the murder of his third wife, Kathy, 8 years earlier.
It's hard to describe all the feelings that you have when someone you have known for so many years and is a member of your family, and now they're found guilty of murder. People were looking at us with, very suspicious eyes because we were part of the suspect's family. So how did you let him do this?
For Drew's son, Stephen, the man the prosecution presented in court was not someone he recognized as his father.
My dad was a great dad. He was a great man, and you would not find a lot of people who would say a lot of bad things about him. Him being a cop was, like I said, the coolest thing in the world, and but overall, I think I just remember always us going camping and fishing and that kind of stuff. Things a good dad would do for his son.
You often forget about the other victims, those family members, the people who get a lot less sympathy. Their loss, their grief, and their trauma oftentimes gets overlooked because they sort of get bundled up with the perpetrators and they get forgotten as actual victims themselves.
This here is my dad as a little kid. From what I hear, he had a pretty happy childhood. And that was him, always smiling, even to this day.
From high school, he later joined the U.S. Army, where he was an MP stationed in Virginia. After the Army, Drew became a Bolingbrook police officer, which is not far from where he grew up. He was promoted to sergeant. For a time, he worked in a special narcotics unit.
This one's one of my favorites. This is my dad's fake driver's license. He was an undercover narcotics officer.
Different people saw Drew differently. So, for instance, with Stephen, he was his son's hero. He represented an authority, trust-loving figure who was fun and at times a hard disciplinarian. But he was dad.
Growing up, me and my brother were his first set of kids, so he was very strict with us. We got whoopings when we needed them, and he kept us in line. If we screwed up in school or our grades slipped, he was on us.
When I first got to know Drew, him and his second wife owned a local bar that was pretty much a watering spot for all of us local in the area. We all knew that he was a Bolingbrook police officer.
Norma Peterson first met Drew's brother Paul, her future husband, in 1993, when he was working behind the bar.
This brings back some very special memories for me. It was a fun place to be, and I got to meet my husband here, so it does have a lot of fun memories for me.
It's an interesting juxtaposition, a policeman owning a bar. Unfortunately, it wasn't illegal at that time. It seems like it's a terrible conflict of interest. But he had a way of always trying to get extra money, and it was like an obsession.
I thought he was kind of an arrogant guy, and but very social, very outgoing. Kind of just came in and out of the bar as he pleased and let his wives pretty much run it.
By the time Norma met Drew, his second marriage was falling apart, and he was already involved with another woman, Kathy.
His attitude was just, women could be had, they could be bought, they could be convinced, manipulated. So that was his thought process, that everybody was up for grabs. It didn't matter if they were married or not.
Drew started dating Kathleen when he was still married to Vicky. Kathleen's family told me she didn't know he was still married. And this was a pattern that repeated itself throughout his life, throughout his marriages. He cheated on his wives with the woman he would later marry.
For us, it was a bit of a shock because we had just learned that he was getting divorced. So it was a quick transition. It was a quick, here's my new girlfriend, gonna be wife, because they get engaged I thought pretty early.
When you looked at them, they looked like they were doing really well. I mean, they really seemed happy. When she got pregnant with her oldest son, you could kind of see the shift in him.
Okay, we're recording. Go ahead, babe.
I want everybody to know out there, Mommy does everything. Daddy just sits around and works.
You could see him eyeing other women. He was spending more time at the bar and not coming home at night and just doing things, So he was not being good to Kathy. And then you could see her frustration where she was really starting to figure out what was going on here. And she was a very strong person. She wasn't going to put up with this.
Ever keen to cash in on a business deal, as well as running the bar, Drew and Kathy began a printing business with Norma and Paul.
We had this business, and it was quite successful for quite some time, actually. And then we started to have some issues with payment. We had been renting a house from them. So what they did was they raised our rent the amount that they were going to pay me extra out of what they owed me. So not only did they, quote unquote, give me my money, they took it back in rent. So they never really had to pay us. And it made our lives very difficult. After that, things really started to go downhill between us. They were accusing us of stealing. We were working an insane amount of hours, and the expectations were getting to be too much, and the environment was just too much.
The two couples severed all ties.
It is what it is. So my mother-in-law started having holidays for us on different days because we couldn't be in the same room together after that.
In the end, Drew's marriage to Kathy lasted 11 years.
They stayed together, but it deteriorated rather quickly.
As time went on, there was a lot of fighting, a lot of arguing. We never really saw anything physical, but there was definitely a lot of yelling and screaming and stuff like that we'd hear. As she had my two younger siblings, it kind of pushed me and my brother kind of on the back burners, as everything became about her and her kids. So there was kind of that little resentment that why are we getting pushed to the side, and why are we not the same as your kids? How is that any different?
In 2001, Drew had some news.
He called me up and let me know he was seeing someone new, and he wanted me to meet her. And kind of, I remember the last thing he said before we hung up was, "Oh, and by the way, she's a little younger, than you're used to." Okay, how young are we talking?
Stacy was a teenage girl working in a motel. She had a very troubled childhood. She was fending for herself. Drew set her up with an apartment. He bought her a car. He provided for her. He was married at the time to Kathleen, but that also didn't stop him from starting a relationship with her.
I go over there, and then that's when I met her. I remember telling one of my friends about it, that I couldn't believe he's doing. I couldn't believe of all the people he's, with a young girl. It was pretty hard to take.
Drew was incredibly clever at, sniffing out people who had low self-esteem, needed certain types of people in their life, to them, he could represent everything that they lacked. And there is a pattern here of choosing younger women.
Drew and Stacy would get together in the basement of his home while his wife and children were asleep upstairs. He was proud of that.
Although Norma and Paul were not speaking to Drew, his acrimonious divorce from Kathy was common knowledge.
I mean, we knew that they were getting divorced. We knew that they were fighting over the money. And we knew that it was not looking good for him, just from what some of the family members had said.
Kathleen repeatedly called the police and reported Drew's treatment of her to the police. She also wrote a letter to an assistant state's attorney where she described a break-in at her house. She said Drew was in her home wearing a black outfit. He's armed with a knife. He threatened her and menaced her and ordered her to sit on the stairs. In the letter, she pleaded for help. She said Drew was going to kill her and take her children away if no one would help her. She predicted her own murder.
Drew moved out of the family home and in with his new girlfriend Stacy, who quickly fell pregnant. The battle over the divorce settlement continued until March 2004, when things suddenly changed.
Drew had his sons for visitation for the weekend, and he went to return them to their mother, but no one answered the door.
And any normal police officer under those circumstances would immediately see there could be an issue, because she's always there. So if she's not there, something has happened. She hasn't called. Maybe she fell down the stairs. Maybe she had a heart attack.
He went back again Monday night, and no one answered the door again.
The people lived next door, when they couldn't contact her, when they found out that she wasn't available, they said, "We've got to go in. We got to go see what's wrong."
He then told the neighbors, "I don't feel comfortable going into the house alone. You know, if Kathy sees me in the house, she's going to call the police. She's going to, she'll accuse me of something." So the neighbors went in. They searched the house and went from Kathleen's bedroom to the bathroom, the adjoining bathroom, and found her dead in the bathtub.
When I first heard the news about Kathy, it was kind of like, yeah, right, she died in a dry bathtub. He was going to set to lose half of everything. And not only is he not going to lose anything, he's going to gain everything. So you kind of wonder, did you say it out loud? Did you go to anybody? No. I mean, do you really think that someone you know and love and grew up with is capable of that? There's a part of you, maybe a small part, that thinks, okay, maybe, but not really.
In the spring of 2004, police officer Drew Peterson's family were coming to terms with the sudden death of his ex-wife, Kathy.
I got a call from my dad that says, "Hey, you gotta come home. Kathy's dead. We need you to come home and be with the family." And it was, a huge shock. You just couldn't believe it. And really didn't give it a second thought it was anything other than an accident, that she slipped and fell, hit her head, and drowned. That's what we were told.
For the first time since their fallout, Drew also called his brother Paul.
The very first conversation we're having after years of not speaking is, my third wife is dead. They found her in a bathtub. They're probably going to call you because they're looking at me sideways, was what he told Paul. His attitude was just, okay, we move on from here. She's gone, so be it. And that was pretty much how he left it with us.
He carries on as normal, as if, this was just a mere blip. Actually, this is a catastrophic tragedy in a family. Now, I wonder whether with the way Drew's mind works, he's got rid of an obstacle in his way, which is not a very normal, natural reaction to have when your partner has died, whether you're estranged from them or not.
The The state police were called in to investigate Kathleen's death because Drew was a Bolingbrook police officer. The state police here don't generally investigate homicides. They do traffic, drug interdiction.
The detective that was assigned to it had never investigated a murder case. This was his first case that would have been a murder case had he investigated it. And literally nothing was done that should have been done.
They didn't collect any evidence. They didn't take fingerprints. They walked around the house to make sure there weren't any broken windows, and they decided it was an accident from the get-go.
Drew seemed determined to manage every part of the investigation.
So when Drew Peterson was interviewed, he was allowed to sit with his wife Stacy, almost like a ventriloquist would sit, and suggest answers for her as she's being interviewed, and she did provide him with a false alibi.
Somebody like Drew, I think, is very, very clever at reading people and knowing when they trust him, mistrust him. This is how he manages to manipulate his environment and those around him.
I remember the wake. It was a filled house. It was kind of awkward because, I know I could sense a lot of people didn't like my dad from her side. At that point in time, my dad and Kathy were divorced, but their finances and the property, that kind of stuff wasn't settled or split yet.
And the reason for that was Stacy was pregnant, Drew and Stacy married, and the financials were to be resolved at a later date, which happened to be right a short time after Kathleen turned up dead in her bathtub.
My dad has always been about protecting his stuff. And if he earned it, it's his. If he bought it, it's his. So I know, there's a lot of stories he would, tell about Kathy's trying to take me for this. She wants a piece of my pension. She wants to get out of this house. She wants a piece of the bar that they sold. So yeah, you could tell he was not happy with it, and he was going to do everything he can to, protect that.
Drew was keen to move on with his life with his new wife and their baby. Due to their estrangement, these developments came as a surprise to Norma.
We didn't know about Stacy until Stacy showed up at a Christmas function. It was the first time that we had met Stacy, and she had their older son, Anthony, with her. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, are you crazy? And now she has they have a son together.
Stacy was, just generally a real great person. She was a kid, so once you get past that and you get past the 30-year age difference, she was generally a nice person.
Family was very important for Stacy, and she was keen for Norma and Paul to be part of their growing family.
And as I got to know Stacy, then I started to feel very protective of her, because she was the same age as my nieces. She was the same age as my stepdaughters. Oh gosh, I remember when Stacy showed me this picture, and we were laughing because she looked like a little kid with a little kid in her lap. And she so enjoyed being a mom.
Stacy had 2 children within a year and a half. So now she had 4 children to take care of. She had Kathleen's 2 sons, and now she had her own son and daughter.
Yeah, she was just a bully person, and they didn't care who was looking at them or who they made feel uncomfortable, but they had fun, and so she was a good person. Good mom.
After Stacy had Lacey, it seemed like she was really starting to get her footing as far as growing up. And we could see that it was causing conflicts because he couldn't manipulate her like he used to. She was growing up, It wasn't as simple as it used to be. When you're 17, you'll go, oh yeah, I'll do this, I'll do that. Now here she is, 22, 23 years old, has 4 kids, a full household, and a husband she can't control.
The honeymoon period is well and truly over. She's probably asking for more give and take in the relationship. There are probably things she's not happy about and feels more confident to step up and say that. This ain't gonna go down well with Drew because he likes his relationships under his power and control.
I had found out that they were kind of having trouble. I was moved out at the time, and I know she confided in my wife. You know, at the time she confided in her and kind of said, hey, things aren't great. You know, we're fighting, we're going to counseling, you know, that kind of stuff.
And we had a family party, and we were all sitting around a table, and we knew that there were issues between them. And we were, I don't even know how it got brought up, but somebody brought up divorce, and Stacy was sitting next to me. And so Drew laughs a little bit, you know, a forced laugh, you can tell. And I said, okay, here's what we'll do. I says, we're going to split you guys up, but we keep Stacy and you get visitation with the family every other week. How about that? We're going to do that because I think we like Stacy better. And, you know, Stacy starts laughing and she's like, see, Drew?
At that party, there was an incident between Stacy and my dad, which made a lot of people uncomfortable because, you know, up until that point, no one really saw anything crazy, no fights, no nothing like that. We decided we were going to throw her in the pool, me and my dad. And, of course, she starts kicking and screaming, you know, whatever. We put her down. And then she starts throwing punches at my dad. You could see it, look around and see people were uncomfortable. But it kind of, you know, brushed over, and it was just, you know, it was no big deal really, but it was.
In October 2007, Drew and Stacy's relationship took a sinister turn.
We were working from home at the time, and we just bought a big screen TV that took up like the wall. And my husband, Paul, would come downstairs, turn on the news, get his coffee, and start working. And apparently, Stacy's picture was on there. So he comes upstairs, and I am still in bed, sleeping, because it is very early in the morning. It's about 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning at this time. And he wakes me up, and he says, Norma, I think you need to see this. It's Stacy. She's on the TV. She's missing. And the first thing that I say is, he killed her.
Police officer Drew Peterson was a serial monogamist. His third wife, Kathy, had been found dead. 3.5 years later, his fourth wife, Stacy, suddenly disappeared.
Laying in bed watching TV, and I get a call from one of my buddies, and it's like, hey, is that your dad on TV, on the news? Like, excuse me? What channel, you know? I flip over, and there, you know, there it was. There's Stacy's picture, you know, missing mother, Bolingbrook mother. Holy cow, you know, I mean, I was in shock.
Stacy goes missing on Sunday. We don't hear from Drew until Monday at 8:30, after it's on the TV, to tell us that Stacy left. She took her bikini and $25,000.
Within a day, Drew was letting me and other reporters in his house. He was freely talking to us. He started to enjoy it very quickly.
I just figured, okay, time's up, you know, their relation's over, you know, okay, she left with someone else. I mean, did it make sense? No, but did it seem odd? Also no. You know, it was just, okay. You know, sorry, Dad, I felt bad for the guy, you know. Obviously he was upset, you know, his wife left him, you know. Okay, is there anything I could do? Let me know, you know. And that was it.
Now, what strikes me as odd immediately is, why would you not call me and ask me who do I think she ran off with? Knowing that we're friends, knowing that we're close, wouldn't logic tell you that if someone went missing or someone took off, you wouldn't call all their friends, anybody who was close to them to say, do you know where she went? Do you know who she might be with? He never does that. That to me is a huge indicator that he doesn't need to look for her. He knows where she's at.
Media coverage of Stacey's disappearance prompted the authorities to take another look at what had happened to Kathy 3.5 years earlier.
Drew Peterson was on worldwide television when his wife disappeared, and he was wearing sunglasses and a bandana and a hat, not exactly acting like the most innocent guy on the block. So at that point, I pulled the file on Kathleen Savio's death. And the moment that I looked at the photograph of her in the bathtub, I said, this is a murder. This is not an accident.
Drew, can you address where you were when Kathleen died?
They find out that his third wife died in a bathtub. So another friend was watching the news and said, hey, they're, supposedly they're looking at, the Kathy thing. I was like, oh, here we go.
She allegedly, fell in the bathtub violently enough to render herself unconscious and drown in the bathtub. She was found in the bathtub, and there was no water in the bathtub.
There's all these new stories of, it was a dry bathtub. She drowned in a dry bathtub, and what we already told, we already knew that there was a leak in the bathtub. So, yes, she could have drowned, and then the water drained out. So it made everything about it made sense.
She had dried blood that had dripped down from the injury to her head across her face and had dried on her face. Well, that can't happen if she's in water. The tub was 44 inches long and 22 inches wide. It was tiny. For someone to slip and fall in that tub with the kind of violence necessary to kill them couldn't happen.
When they officially named Drew a suspect and said they were going to exhume Kathleen Savio's body, I called Drew and I said, hey, I told him. I was the one who told him that. And he's like, I can't believe he was very upset. He said he was.
Drew calls. He's like, I could really use some help. I need somebody to help me take care of the kids. We will be there. We will be there. So we drop everything. We dropped our home. We moved into his house. And we're taking care of the kids. So we lived with that front blinds closed for 3 months, where we never opened those blinds, because when they did, all those cameras would come to the front to see what we were doing.
And it was, for the kids to have to go to school, that made it almost impossible. You had to sneak in and out. I remember at one time we had to pass the kids over to the fence to the neighbor's house so we could walk them out that way, so no one would really notice there was any movement.
At this period of time, Drew's getting to come and go as he pleases because we're taking care of everything. So here he is out on the Today Show, and they fly him to New York, and they put him up in a beautiful hotel, and they take him out to dinner, and they're doing all these things, and he is really liking this life. He had girls come up to him in a bar wanting to be with him. What? He may have murdered 2 people. Why in God's name would you want to even talk to this man? But yet they flocked to him. It was mind-blowing is what it was.
The state's attorney's investigation started turning up damning testimony from friends and family about Drew's treatment of Kathy after their divorce.
He terrorized her. There was one of her classmates from Joliet Junior College who saw her with marks on her neck, and Kathleen told her how he had grabbed her by the throat and said he was going to kill her, and left finger marks on her neck.
We didn't know a lot of what Kathy and Drew were going through at the time. We weren't speaking to them, so we had no idea that she was going through this.
With the investigation into Kathy's death continuing and no sign of Stacey, Norma was certain that Drew had killed her.
Living with someone that you know has the potential to kill is very frightening. Now, I know the truth, and he knows I know the truth. He can't fool me. So now I am taking my life in my hands every time I walk in that door. Because it's like we have a very quiet understanding that I won't ask you anything and you don't ask me anything.
Norma finds herself in an incredibly difficult position. She has to monitor how she behaves around Drew. She has to watch what she says, and because she fears that he's capable of murder.
There was an incident where they had been talking about Stacey having a diary. And so I was searching that house up one side and down the other, hoping against hope that I would be able to find it before he did. Well, I was down the basement, thinking maybe she tucked it in there. And I hear the garage door open. So now that tells me Drew's coming in. I have all of about 30 seconds. So I am scrambling, thinking, dear God, help me. Thankfully, I had remembered that Stacey kept a vacuum cleaner downstairs. And I pull the vacuum cleaner out and I start to undo that, and he comes down. Oh, what are you doing? Oh, just finished vacuuming. You know, just doing some house cleaning, no big deal. That had to be one of the most frightening times I've ever had in my life.
By May 2009, investigators were convinced that Drew had murdered Kathy.
I had gotten tips that this is the day they're going to do it. They're going to arrest Drew. Drew got in his car and pulled out of his garage and drove away. We followed, and the police came out of nowhere, and it was a traffic stop, and they arrested him and handcuffed him and put him in a police car. And I chased after the police car, and it went to the state police headquarters, and I was as far away from Drew as I am to you. And I said, hey, Drew, what do you think? And he was handcuffed, and they were walking him into the building, and he goes, I knew I should have returned those overdue library books.
Drew Peterson was in jail awaiting trial for Kathy's murder, but that left 4 young children without a parent.
So in February of 2009, my daughter was born. And, you know, beautiful home. It's me and my wife and my child. And May 7th of 2009, my dad was arrested. So now we go from having a couple-month-old newborn to 5 kids in an instant. And that was, that was a lot. They needed someone there for him, and I was happy to do it.
After a trial lasting 7 weeks, Drew Peterson was convicted of the murder.
He was a thug. He would threaten people because he had a gun and a badge. And nobody ever took him on. We took him on now, and he lost.
He stood up and screamed in that courtroom in a voice that just made your skin crawl.
I did not kill Kathleen! Yes, you did.
It's the same voice he used with those women. It's the same voice that he has used with anyone he wanted to terrorize or manipulate. What he did was he showed everybody for just a minute who Drew Peterson is.
I did not kill Kathleen!
I remember sitting on my bed, waiting for it, and Drew Peterson guilty. And it was just like years of emotions just came out of me that day. This is it. This is real now. He's not getting out.
The trauma for Stephen is when he has to come to terms with, yes, he did those things. Yes, he is my father. Yes, he was my role model. Yes, he is a murderer. That is a lot for Stephen to come to terms with.
There's a lot of crying, and it was, while it was sad, it was also just a huge weight lifted off you, because now you have an answer, Now you finally know where your life is going to head.
Norma wasn't so sure of her future. She had testified in secret to the grand jury, and Drew's conviction felt far from safe.
He had appeals, and he had appeals, and he had appeals. And some of his appeals were given a pretty good chance of maybe succeeding. And now he knows these things that I've done. If this man gets out, I'm not safe. I'm not safe.
Then in 2015, Drew took matters into his own hands.
A man in prison for slitting the neck of an elderly woman on a home invasion, and a member of a violent street gang sent me a letter and tells me, Mr. Glasgow, Drew Peterson offered me $10,000 to have you killed. So we go interview him, and he agrees to wear a listening device and get Drew Peterson to repeat everything.
You said with Glasgow gone, right?
Yes. He'll get me out.
It's a go, 100%.
Not 100%, but it's better.
But it's better.
Drew said a lot of outlandish things on those wires. At one point, he said, yeah, go, give him the green light, go ahead.
He tells the judge that, he was just kidding when he was soliciting my murder on the tape with the gangster disciple who had the guy ready to go. And he's talking about, we're going to have a party. This is going to be great. They'll never figure out we did this. Yeah, you were just kidding.
And that was enough for them to find Drew guilty of solicitation for murder for hire.
I personally feel that it was completely stupid. I heard the tapes. It would be hard to sell me on that's not what he was trying to do. Whether he was or wasn't, hearing his voice saying, yeah, go ahead and do it and green light it, to me it was pretty obvious.
I truly think that has got to be one of the dumbest things he's ever done. But thank God he did, because it's what helped me to feel safer about him not getting out of jail. It has torn our family apart, is what it's done. There are no more Christmases. There are no more great family gatherings. And this was a family that thrived on being together. And he destroyed it all. We're never the same. You're never the same. I mean, you look at people and wonder, do I really know you?
Everything changed. It was so much to deal with. Obviously it took a toll on my marriage. We ended up splitting up and getting divorced. Everything that could go wrong went wrong. And everything that I worked for and built up and, wanted in life is all gone.
Stephen has raised all 4 of his younger siblings, giving them the love and security that they desperately needed.
There's dark days where you didn't think you'd want to keep going. Luckily I had my kid and the other kids to keep me, give me a reason to keep going.
For everyone in Drew's life, his crimes had a lasting impact. What he did to his wives left Norma determined to create a way victims of domestic violence could report their abuse using a smartphone.
You fill this affidavit out with all the pertinent information. Now you give it to someone you love or someone you trust. So let's say all of a sudden you pop up missing. My best friend or my mother can take this affidavit to a detective and go, look, this was what was going on. She gave me this. I don't know what all is in it, but this is it. If this resource had been available for Kathy, one, she may not have died. People would have believed her. Would it have made a difference for Stacy? Undoubtedly.
I absolutely hope that they find Stacy. Do I think she's alive? No. But I do hope that we could get closure for the kids, because they deserve that, and her family too. But my biggest concern is, the kids. My dad's the only one who truly knows, and I don't think he's going to say it, and I don't think he'll tell us, even on his deathbed. I don't think he's going to tell anybody because he wants to be a victim. So I don't think we'll ever get it.
这应该是跟这背景画，我都应该坐中间来啊。谢谢喵明，谢谢喵明的幽默。车多少钱？60块钱往返，看见没有？哎，咱这有40级的哥们儿喊个喇叭吗？随滨看大海，或者滨发秦皇岛，帮我喊个喇叭行吗？40级大哥喊。
Wonder if I could bring them to live. I could bring my lover. And baby, you make me wait. Now here I go, going back on the road. Now here I go, going back on the road. Now here I go, going back on the road. Now here I go, going back on the road. Waiting you. Back there again, I saw the looking out of the window. Wonder if I could bring them down. If I could bring my love now, baby, you make.
Shorty, if you really wanna go, then you gotta take me the mess. I tried to soak in all the years and take it all in, but I come up for a breath and cry. I gave my promise. I'ma give my